Hi everyone, welcome to our 6th week of classes. We are heading towards the midpoint of this class. So at this point I know things have been really heavy with the technical issues and learning how to use your camera. But at this point I really want everyone to begin to think about their midpoint project, which ultimately is going to link into your final project. So while we're working on mastering technique, we now really want to change our focus, or at least refine what we're doing to try and come up with a cohesive body of work that we can use in our final project. So with that being said, we start out with Sarah's work, and I think Sarah provides us with as good of an example of images that kind of consistently display a similar look and feel, which is very important moving forward. We want to have all of your images looking cohesive, and we want the viewer to be able to look at these photographs and say, hey, these were all taken by ... In this case, it's Sarah. So your first image, Sarah, I should actually go back here. Here was the before the Photoshop Camera Raw interpretation. We can see it's kind of flat and dull, doesn't have a lot of pop to it. And you've gone in and really brought emphasis to that little beam of light that is on this girl's face, which I think is very interesting, very compelling, and kind of especially pulls the viewer into the action that's going on in this little spot here, and especially sort of that meditative look that she's got on her face as she works through those geometric problems and the shapes that are on the floor. So good job with your adjustment there. I like that a lot. The one thing, if we zoom into your image here, you are getting a lot of noise in your photograph, and that is very much a characteristic of working with a high ISO. And if we go into our file information, I'm sure we'll probably see that you're working at an ISO of like 1600, well, 2000, pretty close. And one of the ways we can minimize that noise in an image is through our Camera Raw adjustments. So I'm just going to put the video on hold here, or on pause a second. I'm going to call up an image in Camera Raw and just show you guys how to do that. Hold on a sec here. Okay, so back with you guys, and you notice I'm in the Camera Raw adjustment window, and if we go to the top here, and I had you guys working with the basic adjustments under this tab. If you go over to the detail, which is the third one from the left, it's the two little pyramids. And then to get rid of some of that noise in a photograph, you can see I'm working at an ISO of 3200 here, which is pretty high. We can just go to this noise reduction area down here, and under the luminance, you can kind of work, I would say, about 20 to 25 is a good zone to work in. And you can also play around with the sharpening a little bit like that. And then if we go in, if we look at his skin tones here, you can see that we pretty much got rid of that noise in there. Maybe it's a little bit present. We can maybe kind of push that up a little bit. You can see how it's smoothed out in that area, and it gets rid of the noise. Of course, the one danger is here, you don't want to go too far in the noise reduction, something like that, because you can see now it softens it up so much that it loses a lot of detail, and the image doesn't look quite as focused as it should. So again, we kind of want to keep that down, the color and the luminance somewhere in those 20 zones, and we should be able to get rid of a good amount of that noise in our image. And I guess probably right there is where I would be with that shot. So let me just close this out, and I'll be right back. So then, Sarah, in your image here, that noise, you might want to work with that noise adjustment in your Camera Raw. I'm not really super bothered by the noise in here because I think the graininess in the image actually adds to the expressive characteristics here. So it's not a super big deal in this shot, but it's good to know down the road that you have that tool available to you. And then your second image with the dancer, kind of sort of at the peak of her pose, and then again you've brought a little more emphasis to her silhouette by your camera raw adjustments. What I really love about this image is you've got sort of the repeating patterns of the silhouette of the dancer in the window, on the door, and then actually on the dance floor. So it's looking like you have a really good body of work here started, and I think as you move forward towards your midterm proposal and then your final, you should really have a good step up on your uh, portfolio, and I'm looking forward to see your images as they progress here. So good work. And next up we have Molly's images, and she starts us out with a rose. Looks like our exposure is pretty dark on this one. If we look at our histogram on it, we can see that all the tones are pushed really towards the dark area of it. And then we see her camera raw adjustment is spot on there. You really picked up the brightness in the rose, especially some of these details that are in this shadow area you've really brought out, and that allows us to see the delicate nature of the petal, and certainly the really heavy saturation in here makes this image pop a lot. So good job here. I think you're spot on with those adjustments. And then your next image of the telephone wires, which I think give us a wonderful geometric pattern to look at, and sort of all of these lines pull our eye into this area of the frame. And then you've gone in and messed with the vibrance and the exposure and the clarity and saturation and brought even more emphasis, to these areas of it. The one thing I want you to be very wary of here, when you go a little too far with these adjustments, we start to pick up this grainy noisiness that again is very characteristic of shooting with high ISOs, but also when we kind of push our camera raw adjustments to their edges, we'll also start to get things like this. So just make sure that you don't push things too far so that your image starts to get degraded. You don't want to lose that image quality. Although again, kind of like Sarah's image, I'm not necessarily sure that this bothers me all that much. And to be honest with you, if I was to switch this image to black and white, I think that graininess would be very appealing in there. So, again, more or less an aesthetic choice, but I think your camera raw adjustments, which is primarily what this assignment was about, were very appropriate. And just keep an eye on that image quality and make sure that if it is falling apart like this, or at least getting grainy, that it adds to the overall aesthetic of the image. You probably wouldn't want to have something go this grainy or noisy, where you would want really sharp details in that area. So just be aware of that. But otherwise, I think you are spot on here in your adjustments. Well done. And next up on our list, we have Grace's image. Her first image here almost looks like it was taken at dusk. So we have a pretty dark background here. We really can't see a lot of details that are going on. And, while this image doesn't necessarily need adjustments in a sense, like I kind of like the sort of dark, haunting aspect of it. I think Grace provides us with a really good example of what we can do in Camera Raw. In Camera Raw, this image has a totally different look and feel to it. It has much more pop to it, much more feeling of brightness, of cheeriness, kind of feels like a bright, crisp summer day, and especially the details of the bridge here. Our eye is really drawn to that. and of course we can see all the texture in the snow here. So really two completely different images. This one is definitely dark and haunting, and I almost feel like I wouldn't want to be in this spot all by myself. Whereas this one is much more brighter, poppier, and I feel like just going out for a nice walk in the winter. Is this looks like it's out at Tift Farm? I almost recognize that bridge. So anyhow, if you guys haven't tried shooting out at Tift Farm, a really great location. When I've got my face-to-face classes, we go out there a lot. So I encourage you guys, if you're looking for an awesome place to shoot, especially nature stuff, this is a great place to go, even in the winter. So good job with this one, Grace. And then your second image, we've got our sunset here. And again, we see this a lot in terms of our images before they're processed. They're kind of flat, they're kind of grayish looking, especially in the sky here. While there is color, I think that we can make that color stand out even more. And certainly, Grace, you've done a wonderful job here in Photoshop. You really brought emphasis to not only the color in the sky, but also the juxtaposition of the trees and these windmills in the background. I think our eye is now really drawn to this area, whereas before, certainly it's there, but it just doesn't have that snap or clarity that I think is what is really needed here. So excellent job on this, Grace. I think you nailed it on both these. Good job. And next on deck we have Devin, and looks like Devin has found himself an area that has sun and clear ground and stuff like that. I'm assuming you are with the baseball team down south, which if you're getting some sun, I definitely applaud you and are a bit jealous. So anyhow, we've got this fire hydrant, and we've got some interesting texture going on in both the body, I guess we'd call it, of the fire hydrant. And then we've got the really nice blue sky in the background. And we can see the pre-adjustment image is very flat, very washed out. Neither the fire hydrant or the sky is very interesting. And then on our second image, after the adjustments, we can see that the fire hydrant really pops. That red stands out nice. Our grasses look green. And then, of course, our sky really has a beautiful blue look to it. The one thing that this image, and this is kind of not something that we've really talked about too much, but your sky almost looks a little bit green to me. And certainly in your camera raw adjustments, you should play around a bit with your white balance and see if you can clean that up. I'm just going to show you what I mean, because it's kind of tough when you first start looking at images to get your color balances really right. But if you look at that, that's a before and that's an after. I think the after shot, you can see how that green has been eliminated, and it looks a little bit more natural versus it looking kind of greenish. And I especially see that green up in that one cloud that should be really white. So you can see there that white really looks much whiter and cleaner. So good job with your adjustments on there. And again, as I said, the white balance is something that takes a little bit of experience to work with, but again, would encourage you to play with that white balance slider in the camera raw. I obviously just did it in the levels adjustment, but it's a little bit easier to manage in your camera raw. And then in the second image here, really love all the texture that is going on in the pavement, and beautiful composition of this image. This arrow is just pulling our eye from the left to the right end of the frame. And I want everyone to remember that typically our eyes are trained to work through things from the left to the right. So the fact that you start this arrow on the left-hand part of the frame and have it work through to the right, I think is one of the elements here that really makes this image so successful. And of course, we've got your adjustments then that really darken that up. I also love the crop that you did. You kind of filled that frame up a little bit more, and by sort of darkening up the darks and getting those whites to open up a little bit, it certainly brings more emphasis to all this texture that is in the pavement. And we also, I think, read the stop a lot harder. So visually speaking, the eye travels through here and it hits this line and it literally stops. So great image, probably one of my favorites of the semester so far. So great job with your adjustments here, and keep up the great work. Okay, next on our list we have Ben's images, and Ben provides us with a wonderful still life of a ping pong ball and a paddle and a net. One of the things I really love about this image is this line that just really draws our eye right into the photograph, and then we've got very perfectly arranged paddle with just that little blast of color in the background that throws in the whole idea of Go USA and the Olympic theme that is running through pretty much everything in the sports world these days. So we look at that, and then we go over to your adjusted image. The one thing I find about this image, you zoomed in a little bit for us, and in doing so, I think it brought a little bit more emphasis to the noise that was in the image. So we really got to watch out on this whole noise issue. As I said, some images I think noise really looks good in. However, in other images, and especially here, I think by zooming in, we've lost a little bit of the sharpness and just sort of the punch and pop that we had in the previous image. The one thing I will say, again, I think if we make this a black and white image and play around with it a little bit, I think that this sort of has the potential for being a really, really interesting image, although you don't get that sense of the color that's in the flag in the background. So Ben, if you go back earlier on in the first tutorial, I believe it was Sarah's image, I showed her how to get rid of the noise in an image. So I would just offer that to you as an example of how to get rid of the noise. We also have a feature in our filters here that you can also get rid of noise. If you go under noise and reduce noise, we can also work with that here. I'm going to kind of exaggerate it a little bit by pushing these things way, 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 way up like this and kind of getting rid of the details. But you're going to see that it still has a little bit of noise. So noise is definitely one of those things that is better worked with over in the Camera Raw driver or Camera Raw aspect of Photoshop rather than working with it once you've opened up past Camera Raw. And then your next image, the image of the light bulbs. I'm just trying to orient myself. I'm not sure whether this was supposed to be horizontal or whether it's a vertical orientation. I'm assuming because you submitted it horizontal that you wanted it horizontal. But anyhow, I really love the bokeh that is going on in the background. And that word bokeh, and I'll spell it for you, it's B-O-K-E-H, refers to the area that's out of focus. So this area is out of focus here. It draws our eye to the light bulb. And I love the interplay between the background, which all the lights are on, and the foreground, which we really can see the light, but that light is off. So there's kind of a fun interplay between the two. And then we look at your Camera Raw adjustments. Looks like you brightened it up just a little bit here and changed the color balance on it also a little bit. Again, good adjustments. I think it's more of just a matter of personal taste. So, I think that you made a compelling case for why you made your adjustments here, and certainly we can see the difference in them as you look at them, the before and after, much darker and much more yellow to the images. So again, you've got the idea here, and I think it's a good image. So keep up the good work and look forward to seeing your images next week. And next up we have Anna's images. And we've got, again, a very dark image of a flower, kind of similar to what Molly had done earlier. And then with the camera raw adjustments, we can see how that flower has been brightened up, and especially the color really has been brought out in that image. We can see here that this sort of faded, wilted, darkened, maybe it's, I'm assuming here, a Valentine flower, and then the color is really bright and saturated here. Again, this is kind of a matter of taste, but for me this actually kind of says something about the flower that after a couple days starts to fade and wilt and takes on a different appearance. So, well, I think your adjustments are perfectly appropriate here. Also, just always want to keep you guys' minds open to trying something like this. Sort of the darker, faded quality of it is definitely very expressive and communicates something totally different than this one, but definitely communicates a mood and a theme and so forth. So like that, good job there. And again, you're picking up a bit of noise here, and I'll just refer you to some of the earlier examples in the video of noise and noise adjustments. And then your second image is really dark, so dark that the viewer would almost have difficulty making out what it is. And then in your adjustments, we can see that it is a carnival mask, and certainly you've brought out all the detail, and especially the wonderful texture is in that area where there's all that glitter and pattern that's going on here. So nice job with this. I think you pretty much got the essence of the assignment. Everybody that has been shooting flowers this week, I realize it was Valentine's Day, and we probably had an abundance of flowers out there. But just again, in terms of creativity and bringing something new to the table, I would encourage you to try to push past the simple, straight photograph of flowers and maybe get a little bit more creative with it. So other than that, great job with your technique here, and I'm confident you've pretty much mastered Camera Raw. So good job. And then last but not least is Angela's images, and probably going in reverse order here, but Angela's down at the waterfront, and she gives us an image of the construction. One of the things that you have done here that I really love is you refer back to one of our earlier lessons and talk about how we can use exposure to communicate different things in a photograph. So you went in and made this image a little bit darker, a little bit flatter, and it does seem like the construction is less optimistic here. It seems kind of dark and dreary, and maybe the statement you're making here is that progress isn't always necessarily a good thing. In your original image, I think this is very bright and poppy and seems kind of futuristic, and especially contrasted against the bright blue sky, it almost seems like there's a happy future. So I'm glad that you wrote about this and especially made your adjustments in accordance to that. Again, from an aesthetic point of view, I like the bright sort of poppiness of it here, but what we are judging everything on in this class is intent, and I think your intent here was really good. I love the fact that from a conceptual point of view, you were really trying to take your imaging farther. So I think that's great. And I think, you did the same thing here. You did kind of a little play on what was going on with the very bright colors and the feeling of summer here, and then sort of darkening it up and making it feel very cold and bleak like the winter. Whenever we do black and white images, I think it's important to make your blacks really black and your whites really white. If you look at, I think Ansel Adams probably would be a good example of that. His images have sort of this really wonderful range from black blacks through mid grays all the way to bright whites. So just with this adjustment here, we're going to make the blacks a little bit darker, and in doing so we can kind of bring out a little bit more of the texture in that snow. And I think this image just has a little bit of a less washed out feel than this one. We can see the texture here in the chairs too. So great job. I think you've done a wonderful job with your conceptual approach to your imaging here, and especially your use of Camera Raw to do kind of the opposite of what people are traditionally doing with it. Normally we might tend to want to make things brighter and cheerier. You went completely opposite. You went darker and a little bit more melancholic, and I love the fact that you're working against sort of the cliche, and that's really good here. So great job, and that's a wrap for this week, and look forward to seeing everybody's work next week.